ważne.
We will be starting this hearing momentarily. And until then, I have a few jokes to tell you that lighten things up. No. We thank you very much for coming with us today this morning. And so if we can wait all of these years for independence and recognition, we can wait a few more minutes for the hearing. I call to order this hearing of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe, Asia, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats. Today's topic is Kosovo, or Kosovo. I keep changing the way I pronounce it, just so I won't offend anybody or offend everybody. And Serbia, a pathway to peace. After the ranking member and I each take 5 minutes to make opening remarks, each member present will have 1 minute to make an opening statement, alternating between majority and minority members. And without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, or extraneous materials for the record. And hearing no objections, so ordered. This hearing was postponed to an earlier date, but the delay has proven most fortunate because it was just last Friday that after 6 months, the Prime Ministers of Kosovo and Serbia initialed an agreement mediated by Lady Ashton of the European Union. However, the document that emerged last week was entitled First Agreement of Principles Governing the Normalization of Relations, end quote. So it is not the end of the process, and as it implies, there's much more to come. So today's hearing, we will look at what's been accomplished and what still needs to be done. Just this week, Kosovo's Prime Minister summed up the sentiment on both sides, and that is, and I quote, "Don't expect us to start loving each other." So the divisions are still there and they run very deep. A huge issue has been the status of the 4 overwhelmingly Serbian majority municipalities in northern Kosovo, which borders on Serbia. The Kosovars fought a war, a brave war, and a courageous war for independence because they did not want to be ruled by the Serbs. In the same token, the Serbs do not want to be ruled by the Kosovars. The principle of self-determination, I believe, should apply to everyone. And this wasn't the case over the years for American policy, or at least my involvement in it as a person who was deeply involved in these issues, was never based on because I like Kosovars more than I like Serbs, or vice versa, but always that the principle of self-determination is something that is written down in the American Declaration of Independence and should be part of the heart and soul of what Americans are all about. The United States and NATO supported Kosovo's independence with the use of military force, and it has also sided with Kosovo over who should control the northern Serb communities. Of course, they decided Kosovo. The Serbs have wanted autonomy for municipalities, and Serbia has been supporting, quote, parallel institutions, unquote, to provide local services. While this first agreement favored Kosovo on the principle of, quote, authority over the northern disputed territory, the Serb communities will control their own areas of economic development, education, health, urban and rural planning. Thus, Kosovar authority here, you can read that, sovereignty in those areas is a facade. It's an illusion, which will come back to hurt both parties if an illusion is allowed to sit in order to take one step more in a certain direction. The core of sovereignty is the control of security forces. The agreement places all police and security personnel under Central Kosovo Command. However, the Northern Regional Police Commander will be a local Serb appointed by the Kosovo government from a list provided by Serb mayors. The composition of the police force will reflect the ethnic composition of the population of the 4 municipalities. So, it will be a Serb force under a Serb leader supposedly enforcing Kosovo law. There will be a division of the National Appellate Court established in the north with a majority of Serbian judges to hear cases from the Serbian municipalities. Serbia has not recognized Kosovo's independence and still stands in the way of Kosovo joining the United Nations or other international bodies as a sovereign state. Both did agree not to block each other's path into joining the EU. I don't know what that says about people who want to join the EU at this point. Sort of wishing each other good luck. The New York Times called this a power-sharing agreement. What it doesn't do is satisfy the people most affected, and that is the people of northern Kosovo. As long as there is a clash of identities and a deep distrust born of centuries of conflict, there is a likelihood of more trouble. Negotiations between governments can lead to compromise, but they can also heighten tensions when core values are at stake. Perhaps it is time to consult the people living in the disputed areas and see what they want to do. The people living in predominantly Serb areas of northern Kosovo should be allowed to vote in a referendum for which country they would like to be integrated into. The parallel referendum should be held in predominantly Albanian areas in southern Serbia and surrounding areas, giving them the same choice. And that is an American concept, that the people of certain areas have rights to self-determination through the ballot box. But I don't think anyone will be surprised by the outcome if there was such a vote. The borders of both Serbia and Kosovo could be adjusted in accordance with the desires of the people who are living within those borders. Territory of about equal size could be exchanged to establish a new equilibrium in the region. The result would be 2 much more unified countries without the constraint and irritation of trying to rule over unhappy minorities who are looking across the border for help and sparking disputes. So I would be interested to hear from our panelists why such a democratic process would not be welcome, and what is truly the way to normalize relations between Serbia and Kosovo. With that said, I turn to the ranking member, Mr. Key.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this timely hearing. We're also pleased to be joined by Ranking Member Engel, who has extensive first-hand knowledge and experience in the region. In the last week, we witnessed both Kosovo and Serbia take immense strides towards greater stability and prosperity for their people. Through agreeing to the EU-brokered April 19th agreement, both nations did something rather unprecedented in the region. They set aside their deep-rooted past to focus on the future. If they continue to have this week may signify a turning point for the Balkans as a whole. Of course, there have been many notable successes in the region, but some of that progress has been stalled by obstructive policies that have prevented budding nations from joining Western multilateral institutions like NATO or the EU. If implemented correctly and properly, this agreement can place both Kosovo and Serbia on a path toward EU accession, which is certainly a positive move for both nations and a vision that our own troops help to protect. Yet, peace is fragile, and in the Balkans, this fragile nature can at times take a life of its own. For this reason, I encourage this committee to look forward just as these nations have decided to do, especially since there's much left to be done. Aside from the practical matter of implementing this agreement, the two sides need to address respective corruption and rule of law issues. Further, the region has much to gain from attracting increased investment, which has the potential to encourage cooperation over division. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, both countries must do their best to support tolerance and leadership amongst the youth in Serbia and throughout Kosovo. There are already a number of NGOs in this region, like the National Democratic Institute Crisis Group, and others that foster this type of collaboration, and their work should be encouraged. There is absolutely no need for your younger generations to get wrapped up in battles of their grandparents, and ultimately, I don't believe that anyone within Kosovo and Serbia truly wants their children to repeat the regional cycle of violence that either has experienced. Director Moore, it's good to see you again, and I look forward to your testimony as well as the testimony of our second panel of witnesses. For that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now we have 1 minute statements by the rest of our panel. Judge Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The world is seeing the results when out-of-towners, as I call them, go into an area of the world and start drawing a new map and forcing people to live in that specific areas. Outsiders that force people to live together who really don't want to live together. We've drawn the boundaries, and they do not really reflect the historical situation on the ground. I believe Serbia, though, has been hard at work to make this work. When it comes to identifying the missing from wars, Serbia has done an excellent job. It shared locations of graves, identified bodies exhumed, and more countries, I think, in the area need to follow Serbia's lead in identifying the missing. We also need to recognize that human rights violations occur on all sides. Too little attention has been paid to ethnic violence against non-Albanians, including Serbs in Kosovo. We've seen the destruction of 100 Serbian grave sites and 150 churches destroyed. In February, 9 Serbians were arrested in Kosovo by Kosovo police outside a Serb monastery, allegedly tortured, released without being charged. The accusations of torture were so serious that the EU Lex and the EU mission in Kosovo launched an official investigation, and the 11 accused Kosovo police officers have been suspended. I use this as an example to show that human rights violations still occur in the region. The good news is, in spite of all the problems, now Serbia and Kosovo are trying to work together, I believe both in good faith, to resolve certain issues. As been explained by the chairman, last week, Friday's agreement is a good first start. It is important that the rest of the world keep these two areas of the world in constant conversation and communication and discussion about resolving issues that they both are concerned about. When people are not talking, bad things occur. So this is a good first step. I urge the EU national leaders to formally agree to start talks with Serbia at their summit in June. My personal opinion is it's the best interest of Serbia and the United States that Serbia look to the West and not look to the former Soviet Union for political dialogue. Just because some deal has been worked out since last Friday doesn't mean problems have been resolved. There are numerous unresolved human rights cases throughout the area. There's a problem with ethnic tension and violence, and we must take a stand for all victims of violence, regardless of who they are and where they're from. Ethnic violence is always wrong, no matter who does it. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Next, we have a statement from the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Elliot Engel, who has been deeply involved in this issue for at least 20 years. And we were both very young and handsome at that time. And, but Elliot is someone who's kept very active in this issue. He understands the area, and we're very happy that you joined us today. And you may use whatever time that you choose to consume.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you for the opportunity to join your subcommittee today. As the Ranking Member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, let me say, Mr. Chairman, that we both share a long-standing interest in the Balkans, and while I may disagree with some of your proposals regarding moving borders, you have been a serious and important player in all of these issues for so many years. You know, we obviously are classmates together. We came to Congress together in 1988, and there's been no one who's been more serious than you, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of knowing these issues, working hard on these issues, and trying to resolve these issues. So I look forward to continuing our discussions on efforts to bring peace and bring peace and prosperity to the region. This hearing is obviously, as the Ranking Member pointed out, very timely, as it comes on the heels of an agreement reached between the Prime Ministers of Kosovo and Serbia. I congratulate Kosovo and Serbia for reaching this landmark agreement, and in particular, I would like to recognize Prime Minister Thaci for his courage and his willingness to make hard decisions, and Prime Minister Dacic for his pragmatism and forward-leaning vision. The personal involvement and leadership of EU Foreign Policy Chief Lady Ashton has been critical to this historic agreement. It sends a clear signal of hope to a region which longs for an end to conflict and to peoples who want to live their lives in peace and prosperity in the European Union. I was very happy to have a chance to speak with Lady Ashton about this region when she was last in Washington a few months ago. And yet, again, which is another very positive point, this is yet another affirmation of the fact that the Republic of Kosovo is independent, sovereign, free, and permanent. I was a leading supporter of independence for Kosovo, and I'm proud of how far they have come. It's been 9 years since the EU declared at the Thessaloniki summit that, quote, the future of the Balkans is within the European Union, unquote. Croatia's July entry into the EU validates the strategic vision. Of last week's agreement, the EU is moving to buttress the confidence of the other Balkan states, including Kosovo, that their day is near, and we learn once again that it is the shared aspiration of EU membership that binds the Balkan states together. The Kosovo-Serbia agreement underscores the understanding that the region will only prosper when all of the states of the Balkans have joined the European family, and I welcome all of them into the EU. The EU, as it now offers Serbia a date for EU accession negotiations, must also offer Pristina, what other Balkan countries have already been granted, a clear and transparent pathway to future membership. I would like to take a minute or so to discuss Kosovo's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Brussels is working with Pristina on moving Kosovo toward a stabilization and association agreement and toward visa liberalization, where Kosovars will be able to travel freely to Europe, as citizens of their fellow Balkan countries can already do. Unfortunately, the progress is halting and slow, and unlike its neighbors, every little step in Kosovo's progress with Brussels could face a veto by one of the 5 EU non-recognizers of Kosovo independence. While this makes the climb even steeper, it makes Kosovo's accomplishments even more significant. In the end, we must ensure that Kosovo be included in Europe along with its neighbors, because otherwise we would create a new black hole in the Balkans where our worst fears of crime, corruption, and worse could come true. Kosovo's pathway toward NATO is equally very important. Along with other countries in the region, Kosovo's membership in NATO will cement its Western outlook while adding another strongly pro-American country to the alliance. In fact, Kosovo is the most pro-American country in Europe, according to a recent Gallup survey. Of course, membership in NATO requires Kosovo to develop a military, and I am glad that we may see the early steps in that direction through the planning of a professional defensive army later this year. As a sovereign and independent republic, Kosovo has every right to build its armed forces, and it speaks highly of the new country that it plans to work closely with the United States and our European allies on the timing and organization of its defense forces. We must not buy into the irrational fears of some who express unfounded misgivings about a potential Kosovo military, considering the assurances that it will be small and defense-oriented. Regardless, I look forward to the day when Kosovo's troops will stand side by side with American soldiers in the fight against international terrorism and other global ills. And finally, I think it's long past time for the 5 EU holdouts to recognize Kosovo. 22 EU nations do, 5 do not. Not only has the International Court of Justice accepted Kosovo's declaration of independence as valid and legal, but with the Kosovo-Serbia normalization agreement, there is no reason left for the continued intransigence. I hope the State Department, along with European foreign ministries, will now renew their efforts to bring about more recognitions. There are certainly additional challenges which the new country must still address. Unemployment is high, corruption continues to place a drag on the economy, and inter-ethnic relations must continually be strengthened. At the same time, however, agreements between Serbia and Kosovo must be fully implemented, and, as laid out in the latest accord, parallel structures in the north must either be eliminated completely or made a transparent part of the unified Kosovar state so that minorities can be treated fairly wherever they are. Again, I would like to congratulate Kosovo and Serbia for signing the agreement on normalization and offer my help to both countries in their efforts to join a Europe whole and free. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to offer my thoughts on the matter and the time, and again look forward to working with you and the ranking member.
Mr. Holden.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing as the subcommittee examines the recent agreement between Kosovo and Serbia and what this means in terms of providing a starting point for achieving regional stability as both countries look to the international community. While I served as the United States Attorney for Eastern North Carolina, I was privileged to travel to Kosovo and work with their government, the Department of Justice, to train law enforcement authorities, which focused on establishing their rule of law by ensuring the proper enforcement of criminal laws. Indeed, while U.S. Attorney, I sent about a dozen different missions to Kosovo from my office, comprised of federal prosecutors and various members of law enforcement to engage, and then in return we welcomed several missions from Kosovo to North Carolina to cross-train. So I'm encouraged by the recent developments made within the last week, recognize that challenges still exist, look forward to hearing from our witnesses as how we can best support their efforts. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
And Mr. Stockton.
I want to thank the Chairman for taking on issues which are not always popular, but are nonetheless very important. I was fortunate to visit Belgrade a few years ago, and I think it's important we listen to all sides and to work out a solution that we can all benefit from. And I appreciate these hearings being open and honest and balanced, and I look forward to working out a solution that we can all join on. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Our first panel, which is composed of a representative of the administration, and then we will follow by a second panel of experts. So our first panel is Jonathan Moore, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Euro-Asian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, and has led policies responsibilities for Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia. That's quite a portfolio. He is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service and with extensive experience in this region. He was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade in 1991 and was desk officer for the former Yugoslavia in the State Department from 1993 to 1995. He was Deputy Director of the State Department's Office of Russian Affairs from 2000 until 2002, and prior to his current assignment was Deputy Chief of Mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 2009 to 2012. And Mr. Moore, if you could perhaps keep your statement down to about 5 minutes, and the rest will be put into the record, and you may proceed.
Chairman Rohrabacher, members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. I am honored to appear before you to discuss Kosovo and Serbia. On behalf of the State Department, please allow me to thank you and the subcommittee for your timely and deep interest in these countries, as well as in the broader Balkan region, where the United States continues to make investments of personnel and resources to ensure that the conflicts of the 1990s are not repeated. The governments of Kosovo and Serbia concluded a significant agreement last Friday through the European Union facilitated dialogue. This development has come after years of sustained engagement by the United States and our European partners. In order to speak of Europe that is whole, free, democratic, and at peace, the Balkans must be in the European and Euro-Atlantic family. This has been a goal of administrations, both Democratic and Republican, for over 20 years. As we have seen elsewhere in Europe, integration has been and remains the best means of fostering long-term stability, investment, and prosperity. The unprecedented joint visit of Secretary of State Clinton and European Union High Representative Ashton to Pristina, Belgrade, and Sarajevo last year is proof that we in the EU stand united in this goal. The parties' April 19th agreement on the normalization of relations includes a durable solution for northern Kosovo within Kosovo's legal and institutional framework with substantial local self-governance under Kosovo law. The agreement covers the creation of an association or community of Serb-majority municipalities in Kosovo that may exercise municipal competencies collectively and will also have a role in representing the Serb community to the central authorities. On April 22nd, High Representative Ashton and EU Enlargement Commissioner Füle recommended to EU member states that negotiations be opened with Serbia on EU accession and with Kosovo on an EU stabilization and association agreement, as well as allowing Kosovo to participate in EU programs. We welcome these recommendations, which the European Council will consider at its June session. While the dialogue is an EU-led process, it has had our full and active support. Our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Ambassador Philip Rieker, has actively engaged the parties and the EU. We have been in constant contact with both countries' leaders, including meetings of Vice President Biden with President Nikolic and Prime Minister Taci in Rome in March. We are encouraging Kosovo and Serbia to implement expeditiously and fully all dialogue agreements. We know, Mr. Chairman, this will not be easy. Hardliners and criminal elements in northern Kosovo will resist. They have long benefited from the conditions that disadvantage and intimidate the population in northern Kosovo, keeping the situation there on edge and perpetuating weak rule of law. Dismantling the parallel political and security structures in northern Kosovo will be a major challenge. Municipal elections in the north this year, with OSCE facilitation, should usher in a new era of accountable, decentralized, and effective governance. Serbia must demonstrate the willingness and ability to use its influence to isolate those who block implementation. For its part, Kosovo must demonstrate the commitment and ability to protect and preserve the lives and livelihoods of the Kosovo Serb population in the north and throughout the country, and to guarantee the rights afforded to them by Kosovo and international law, including the far-reaching self-governance to which they are entitled under Kosovo's constitution. Of course, the full cooperation of both Kosovo and Serbia with the international community and its missions, NATO's Kosovo Force, KFOR, and the EU Rule of Law Mission, UX, remains essential for success. The United States will support both parties and its partners on the ground in their implementation efforts. Despite the difficulties, this agreement is the best way forward. Reconciliation is the goal of Serbia and Kosovo, not partition or land swaps. This administration, like the Bush administration, recognized Kosovo's independence in 2008, has made clear its commitment to a democratic, sovereign, and multi-ethnic Kosovo within its existing borders. Assistant Secretary of State Gordon stated our policy before the subcommittee in November 2011. There is no way for borders in this region to be redrawn along ethnically clean lines. Questioning the ability of people of different ethnicities to live together is harmful to regional reconciliation and contrary to the international community's decade-long effort to move the region beyond the brutal conflicts of the 1990s. The April 19th agreement should be the focus. It is a key signal that both governments are capable of making compromise and are committed to putting the past behind them, moving forward with their European aspirations and building a peaceful and prosperous future. Mr. Chairman, we remain committed to helping them realize these goals and hope for your support and that of the subcommittee. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, I'll ask a few questions. We'll pass this on to other members as well. First is, the agreement sets out in detail the establishment of a Serb-led police force in the northern areas, in that northern area of Kosovo. The commentators claim also that there was some sort of sidebar agreement not to deploy Kosovo's security forces or special police units into that northern Serbian area, except in an emergency. Is that true?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman. The Kosovo security forces work very closely with NATO and KFOR. The authorities in Kosovo fully respect the role of KFOR to provide safe and secure conditions in northern Kosovo. As you have seen from the informal text of the agreement that has circulated, there is no role for KSF in implementing the agreement. So we are quite confident that KFOR has the lead, not the KSF in the north and in the context of implementation.
So the answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
Thank you. Both Serbia and Kosovo want to join the EU, and Kosovo has expressed interest in joining NATO. Do we have a position on whether or not they should be part of NATO, both these countries?
Mr. Chairman, as you know, NATO operates by consensus. Serbia has not sought membership in NATO. Kosovo is not yet in a position to have applied for membership in NATO. The Kosovo Security Force needs to evolve. It will do so with the help of NATO. This is something being discussed in Brussels now with our NATO partners and allies. We certainly see the potential for their future in Euro-Atlantic institutions. That means NATO and the EU. If Serbia chooses to apply, that would be taken very seriously. We have excellent bilateral military-to-military relations with Serbia as well as with Kosovo. That will depend upon the desires of those countries and, of course, the decisions of all NATO member states, including ours.
So the bottom line is that we have no position on it right now, but maybe in the future.
We support them having that aspiration. We'll have to see.
Right. Okay. Though this agreement gives the central government in Kosovo authority, on paper at least, over the entire claimed territory, or what you said within existing borders, I think was the phraseology you used. Does the local power that's been granted to Serbians in the northern part of the country, doesn't that mean, and especially what you have just acknowledged, there wouldn't be Kosovar forces going up there, doesn't that mean autonomy? And wouldn't an autonomy up there in the northern part of Kosovo harden the feelings on both sides? And if Kosovo can't control the north, which is composed of 90% of the people who don't want to be part of Kosovo, why do you think it wants to hang on to it, and why are we encouraging them to keep authority, but not actually having authority, but the facade of authority over an area in which has autonomy from their rule?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we do not use the term autonomy in the context of the agreement and what is being granted to those municipalities. Right. By the way, it's important to note that the opportunities, the rights of those municipalities, which they can exercise collectively, extend to other municipalities in the south of Kosovo that have a majority Serb population. In terms of the eventual development of the Kosovo Security Force and its role in the north, that is a subject for a later point. In terms of immediate implementation of the dialogue, all of these matters need to be worked out. But Mr. Chairman, I think part of the fundamental perspective we have, and granted as diplomats, we are looking for the middle path, the compromises to succeed is that we honestly don't believe that ethnic rights and freedoms are protected by anything other than the rule of law. You make the point, Mr. Chairman, the population may be 90% Serb, but it's not 100% Serb. We don't believe that ethnic rights and freedoms, human rights, are protected by making countries ethnically pure. I think the key thing is the rule of law. So that's what we hope to see in the
I'm sure
North.
that our great thinkers at the State Department have charted out philosophically how people must be taught to respect the rule of law, and that's the nirvana, that's the solution that's going to happen. You know, these people have been fighting each other for centuries, and we're just going to have a rule of law concept that's going to let some of them then say, well, we will just submit to these people who have been fighting for centuries, rather than trying to find a way in which people in Kosovo are happy to be in Kosovo, and people in Serbia are happy to be Serbians. Thus, they don't have to believe in anything except what they really desire, which is a national identity, of being ruled within a national identity. Let me ask you this. Why is it that when we always focus on the Serb communities in Kosovo, when we're talking about autonomy and things such as that, but we never mention the Kosovar communities in Serbia? There are several areas right near the border in this valley there that are just as heavy a concentration of Kosovars as you have a concentration of Serbs north of the river. So how come we never talk about Kosovars and their community across the river and their desire for autonomy?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that point as well. Talking about the ethnic Albanian population in that part of southern Serbia, Kosovo, Bujanovac, we have every confidence that the government of Serbia will look after the human rights of its citizens there, regardless of their ethnicity, and we have the same confidence in the ability of the government of Kosovo to look after all of its citizens in the north or the south, regardless of their ethnicity. So that's why we're focused on the rule of law aspect of that.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Keating, and then we'll just let the jury go down maybe go to the judge, and then let the jury will have a time to like Zoom.
Mr. Chairman. April 19th agreement includes the establishment of an implementation committee by the two sides, with the facilitation of the EU in place as well. How strong do you feel the EU's role has to be in order to actually ensure that implementation? And are there clear penalties laid out by the EU or the US if Serbia or Kosovo do not implement the accord? For instance, could the EU freeze Serbia's accession talks or Kosovo's stabilization association agreement? What do you feel is done?
Congressman Keating, thank you for the question. Yes, of course, as an EU facilitated process, the continued role of the EU is critical to the success of the process. The next implementation meetings are taking place in Brussels even today, tomorrow, the rest of the week, to see about the best way to move things forward. Both sides fully recognize that it was not just by initialing this agreement last Friday that they move forward on their EU paths. They have to show commitment, and they have to work to implement the agreement. So while it is up to the EU to decide what penalties or steps they might take, it is certainly necessary for both Serbia and for Kosovo to act to implement this agreement in order to benefit from positive decisions by the European Union.
Just want to quickly say, do you think any kind of penalties are in order as part of that enforcement process? Can you envision?
I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, from, Congressman Keating, from what I know, what we've heard, the EU is definitely going to hold both sides' feet to the fire. Exactly what the menu of options is for them, it may be among those that you suggested. That will have to be determined by the willingness of one side or both sides to implement. The important thing is that both Kosovo and Serbia have paths towards the European Union, and that neither can hold up the other.
And you think that one of those possibilities could be not allowing accession?
Certainly that, again, becomes a matter for the member states. Accession to the EU is years away, even for Serbia. We just saw for Croatia the process was well over 10 years. So there are many steps along the process where the EU can stall or suspend or make other demands if they have concerns, and we expect that they would do that if implementation is not complete.
You mentioned, Kosovo lags behind the other countries in the Balkans in its efforts to join the EU, but while Serbia is moving ahead with accession talks, Kosovo is still working to achieve visa liberalization and a stabilization and association agreement with the EU.
Yes.
And every small step in Kosovo's progress with Brussels could indeed, as mentioned before by the ranking member, could face a veto by one of the 5 EU non-recognizers, making their path even harder. Can you discuss Kosovo's pathway toward the EU? Are they making steady progress at this point, even if it's a ways off? Or are there more roadblocks, literally and figuratively, ahead? Is there a way that the U.S. assistance to Kosovo can be used to help Pristina with some of the technical requirements involved in moving forward in the EU? What could be the U.S.'s role in that regard?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Keating. In terms of the support and assistance of the United States on specific issues, for example, visa liberalization, that comes down to many aspects of the rule of law and the functioning of Kosovo's institutions and many technical requirements. The assistance we have in the rule of law sector along the lines of where Congressman Holding did his work years ago was very important to that effort. On a grander scale, of course, this agreement opens many doors to the EU for Kosovo as well as for Serbia. On the specific issue of non-recognizers, it's of course true, Congressman, that recognizers at one point or another can raise objections or concerns to the process moving forward. That's the nature of how the EU works. We would certainly like to see a situation where those 5 non-recognizers are able to recognize Kosovo. We have an ongoing diplomatic effort to encourage greater recognition of Kosovo, not just in Europe, but all around the world. Those countries, like other EU members, will have to choose on their own level what decisions they want to make and how supportive they are of Kosovo's progress towards the EU.
You mentioned briefly that the U.S. could be helpful in giving technical advice towards moving towards the rule of law. What other things could the U.S. be doing besides that?
Well, there are many aspects, of course, of EU legislation. I forget how many tens of thousands of pages of laws, rules have to be harmonized, have to be implemented as the country moves towards the EU. Rule of law is an obvious sector because legislation has to be implemented, harmonized and implemented throughout Kosovo. There are other areas in which we work to provide assistance for the growth of the economy, for example, but and in the energy sector, that's not as directly tied to their EU prospects, but it is necessary for their long-term prosperity and economic success.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Judge Holmes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening statement to Mr. Moore, human rights violations are a big concern, and part of the reason is the people involved, the countries involved, believe that there are human rights violations in another country. That causes tension in trying to work out some long-term relationship of trust. I want to ask you about the status of the Special Investigative Task Force investigating organ trafficking ring operation out of the so-called Yellow House in Kosovo. This operation supposedly took place 1999 to 2000, maybe after that, when I've been to Serbia and Kosovo. This is talked about and brought up quite a bit. It's not talked about, I don't think, over here in the United States much, and I don't know about the United Nations, but it's talked about as a situation that's not resolved. And do the findings made by the Council of Europe Special Rapporteur Dick Marty, his findings deserve some kind of closer look? And has anybody been brought to, so to speak, justice for these accusations? Has it been resolved one way or another? I mean, it's been a while. Where are we on this, Mr. Moore? And let me just finish this. You said that we expect that the Kosovos will make sure that there are no human rights violations in their country, and we expect the Serbs to do the same. This may be an example of where that ain't working out so well when we have these accusations of human rights violations. So help me out with this. Where are we on the Yellow House situation?
Thank you, Your Honor. First, let me say that, unfortunately, as is documented in our annual human rights reports to Congress, There are human rights violations in countries all around the world, including very well established.
I'm not talking about around the world. Let's talk about the area that we're talking about today, Mr. Moore.
I'm very pleased to do that, Your Honor. In specific reference to those accusations, we take them and all accusations of war crimes very seriously. Clint Williamson, the former ambassador at large of the United States for war crimes, is leading the Special Investigative Task Force. He's doing that under the auspices of the European Union ULEX mission. The work continues. The hope is that...
What does that mean, that the work continues? What does that mean? What is being looked at? Are people being questioned? How long is this investigation going to take? Is it going to be another investigation like the Warren Commission? This takes forever? Or what? Is there going to be some resolution to it? So, kind of cut to the chase, Mr. Moore. Where are we on this investigation?
Well, thank you, Your Honor. You'd be more familiar with the amount of time needed for prosecution than I am. The hope is that a prosecution will be possible in the next year. Ambassador Williamson and his team are still collecting evidence. They're doing that through ULEX. The latest information I have, Your Honor, is that they are not ready to go directly to a prosecution. There's also a question about where the prosecution is going to take place. I will take that question, if you allow me, Your Honor, and get you any more specific up-to-date information on that. Ambassador Williamson is working very actively, and certainly the intention is to have a prosecution if there's sufficient evidence to warrant that within the next year.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate some follow-up in writing. NATO, what is the current position of the Serbian government and its desire or lack of desire to be in NATO? When I've been over there, I hear different things. What is it today regarding Serbia being a part of NATO?
The latest information we have with regard to the current opinion of the standing government in Serbia, they have not in any way applied for NATO membership. The previous governments had not done that. We do have a very active military-to-military relationship at the highest ranks, but at this point, I am unaware of any desire by this or previous governments in Serbia to apply for NATO membership.
Thank you. I will yield back.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. And now I yield to Mr. Engel for what planning issues to consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that there have been trials by some people, Ramush Haradnai and others, in The Hague, and Mr. Haradnai was found innocent of all charges twice. So we in the United States are not used to a situation where if you are found innocent at a trial, you can be recharged on the same issues. He was recharged and done innocent twice. I think it's important to state that. Let me ask you that Kosovo hopes not only to join the EU in the future, but to join NATO as well. To do that, it has to first establish a military and join the Partnership for Peace. Could you let the subcommittee know the U.S. position on when the independent, the sovereign Republic of Kosovo will be able to create a military and join the Partnership for Peace? Will the United States support Kosovo's efforts to establish a military and join the Partnership for Peace?
Thank you, Congressman Engel, for your question. Let me say that, as I mentioned before, we're working very closely with our NATO allies on exactly these issues now. The Kosovo security, of course, has essentially a civil emergency priority now. The evolution of that into a different sort of military is something which involves KFOR and NATO very closely. It is also a matter of consensus within NATO, exactly the sort of relationship that NATO is able to support, the sort of forces that NATO is able to support. This is an ongoing topic. At the same time, we're working with the Kosovo Security Force directly. We're working with the Ministry of the Kosovo Security Force on these sorts of questions. It is a likely step for that to evolve at some point in the near future, but this is a matter of discussion both with Pristina and within NATO.
Well, I just think that the U.S. needs to let our European allies know, particularly the 5 EU countries out of the 27 that still do not currently recognize Kosovo, that they ought to do it. I know that has been our position, and I know we've been somewhat vocal about it. but I think that in light of the April 19th Accord, I think that should change the equation. Do you think that the April 19th Accord will cause those 5 EU countries that do not currently recognize Kosovo to do so?
We would certainly like to think that the April 19th Accord would provide greater impetus and justification for recognition by those 5 countries outside Europe. That is part of our diplomatic efforts, as you say, Congressman Engel. We'll have to see what successes we have with that effort. But certainly we should have more reasons to engage, if not recognize, Kosovo.
How about us? Will we make a renewed effort to do this?
The pursuance of recognition of Kosovo is an active effort. We have a full-time action officer in my office at the State Department focused on this, whether it's for Europe, Asia, Africa, or the rest of the world. We have a comprehensive effort to seek recognitions. I even traveled to Africa in an effort to secure more recognitions from African countries as part of the delegation with Kosovo. This is a very comprehensive effort, and I can assure you that we continue to engage on that.
I'm for Kosovo joining the EU, and I'm for Serbia joining the EU. Should Serbia and Kosovo join the EU at the same time in order to prevent the potential of Serbia blocking Kosovo's membership? What are we doing to make sure that if Kosovo is moving at a slower pace with the EU, it's essential that Serbia cannot or would not block it? And what can we do expecting Kosovo's aspirations to join the United Nations that's currently blocked by both Serbia and Russia?
On the first question, in terms of their path towards the EU, they are on different tracks. They're, of course, at different starting points. Serbia is already a candidate member, and Kosovo is just looking at securing a stabilization and association agreement. Exactly what tempo, of course, that they pursue towards EU membership will depend very much upon their performance in the process of introducing and implementing legislation, meeting other steps, meeting other criteria set by the EU. They are separate tracks, as was pointed out in the agreement, of course. Neither can hold back the other. That is a principle to which they should continue to be held, so regardless of which country reaches membership first, they would not be able to disadvantage the other. That has been an issue of evolving policy in the European Union, and we'll have to see at what stage the European Union is when that question arises. If it's a question of one trying to block the other, we certainly would hope that's not the case.
Well, is it ironclad that it cannot happen? It seems to me to be a bit unfair if there is even the remote possibility that it could happen. It would seem to me that we should make it clear, the EU should make it clear that could not happen, that one country could not block the other.
Congressman, that's an excellent question. I can only tell you that in the recent case of Croatia and Slovenia raised objections quite late in the process to Croatia moving forward. They were able to address that issue bilaterally. The EU has changed the circumstances under which a single member state can block the progress of a new member. I think that process will need to evolve, but I apologize. I'm not in a position to speculate about exactly how things will be. Even for Serbia, we're talking a process that will last, to judge by other averages, at least a decade.
Okay, let me ask you a final question. I've been deeply concerned that to date no individuals have been convicted for the brutal killing of 3 United States citizens, the Petici brothers, Agron, Mili, and Mehmet. As you know, they were helping to save the lives of a Roma family from Kosovo, where they were unlawfully detained by Serbian authorities and suffered an execution-style murder. It's a long time ago. We want to move on. About 11 years after the discovery of their bodies, no one has been held accountable for their killing, and the chief suspects in the chain of command, including the camp commander, have never been charged. So what is the status of their case, and can you describe the State Department's efforts to press Serbia to bring the killers to justice? Is there anything more that Congress can do to help press Serbia to achieve justice for the Petici family? I just met with the 4th Petici brother who's in New York. Just a few weeks ago, I sat down with him.
Thank you, Congressman. This is a case which disturbs us greatly, the arrest and then murder of 3 American citizens. We also have met with Fakas Petici, the surviving brother who was in the United States. We have engaged at this level, at the most senior bilateral levels, including by Secretary Clinton when she was in Belgrade last fall. Our Deputy Secretary of State raised it directly with Prime Minister Dacic, and he's also Interior Minister of Serbia. We continue to call upon these authorities in Belgrade to investigate this case and to prosecute it. We are not aware of direct progress. There has been no arrests. There have been no arrests in this case yet. Serbia is certainly very well aware that it's extremely high on our bilateral agenda. We want to see justice in this case, as in all cases of war crimes. This happens to involve, as you say, 3 American citizens, so it figures prominently in our bilateral agenda from that perspective as well. But unfortunately, to this point, we have not received any information from the government or authorities of Serbia that case is moving forward, other than some investigations.
Well, let me conclude by saying that I think that this should continue to be pressed and is a real priority. I know the chairman would agree with me because we've discussed these issues a lot. These are 3 American citizens, and we really demand answers for American citizens.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess in a case like that pending, that it undermines this belief that everyone can just trust the rule of law, even though you set up a situation where you have people who hate each other or are within the same governmental structure. Mr. Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking of the rule of law, I'd like to take my time and allow you to give us, or give me somewhat of an update on the state of the rule of law in Kosovo. I believe I was there in 2010, plagued by high unemployment and high crime and total corruption. So I'd be interested in having your thoughts as to where they stand now. Have they had some improvement over the course of the last 3 or 4 years?
Congressman Holding, thank you for the question. We do believe there has been improvement. Part of that has come about because of our assistance programs and our cooperation. As you mentioned, we offered training exchanges. We brought people from law enforcement organizations and authorities here. We worked through different programs of the U.S. Department of Justice with judges, with prosecutors. We work directly through ISITAP with the police in Kosovo as well. It's a comprehensive effort. It takes a lot of time. Corruption is rampant throughout the region, throughout the former Yugoslavia. These are all countries, even the most established like Serbia, that suffer under a history of years of communist and undemocratic leadership and institutions. So it's a tough road. I think there has been progress. We believe there's been improvement. But indeed, the Kosovo police is better able, for example, to protect Serbian historical and cultural sites than they did in the past. Of 9 key sites, they're able to provide security at 7. There are excesses. The situation is not perfect. I'm taking Judge Poe's advice and comments into mind. I don't wish to comment on comparisons to other countries, but suffice it to say, we're not done with the work. We're working closely with ministers of the Interior and other such leaders to fix things, but we do see some improvement over the past few years. And I apologize, I don't have a direct means to quantify that now. If this is of interest to you, I'd be happy to follow up with more specific information on that.
That would be great if you could get back on that. The level of cooperation that we have now, has it been increasing in the number of years as far as Department of Justice cooperation, UX lawyer cooperation? Is that still on the rise, or has that started to diminish?
Congressman, you're correct. It has started to diminish based on needs and priorities around the world for U.S. assistance dollars. The number has gone down a bit. Both Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina are still focal points for U.S. assistance in the region. Those numbers have gone down for all countries in the region, but we still have a robust effort coordinating with our colleagues at the U.S. Department of Justice on rule of law cooperation in Kosovo.
Kosovo always has struck me as a great opportunity for the United States to partner with, because it's a nation that likes the United States. And it has a predominantly Muslim population of some 90%, and it is a Muslim nation that likes the United States. And I think there's great opportunity there, being the youngest nation on our planet, and hopefully it will be welcomed into the fold by all nations as it comes to fruition in the course of years. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much. I have one last clarification for you.
Please.
Was it your testimony earlier that part of this understanding, if not part of the agreement, was that Kosovo would not deploy security forces in those northern provinces that are dominated, or Serbian dominated, and that would, however, that was going to be compensated for in some way, balanced off because the fact that KFOR and U.S. forces would then be deployable. Is that correct?
In the context of what you correctly pointed out, Chairman Rohrabacher, as the first agreement, there is no role for KSF. And freedom of movement and the safe and secure environment will be handled by UX and KFOR without needing to turn to KSF. So in this immediate situation, as this is again just the first step, there is no role for KSF or a successor military. However, in the future, that could change, and if I have stated in a way that there is no role at any point in the future, that would not be correct. In the context of this agreement and the effort to implement this agreement, there is no role for KSF.
Okay, so the agreement then actually depends upon KFOR and the United States to continue indefinitely, because there's no mention as to any length of time that this status quo will exist either. That is quite disturbing.
May I clarify further, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
you may.
It is certainly not our intention that KFOR should remain there indefinitely. There are still 5,000 troops in KFOR, of which nearly 800 belong to the United States. Recognizing needs and priorities around the world, we want to see that change. The hope is that with this effort to implement this agreement, over time, the security situation in Kosovo will evolve, and we hope, by the way, a shorter timeline and a longer timeline, so that KFOR's role does not need to be what it is today, and that both the United States and other troop contributors can appropriately reduce their presence on the ground in Kosovo.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that, again, that things would evolve a lot quicker if people would draw maps that are consistent with the will of the local population, rather than expecting the local population to ignore the attitudes and the values that they have developed and reactions to each other that have been developing for centuries. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And next we have another panel. They may proceed to sit down. And we will have 5 panelists, and each one will be expected to testify around 5 minutes, but have more in-depth testimony will be made part of the record as part of their testimony. And thank this panel of witnesses for joining us today. We will start with Daniel Sower, who is a senior research professor of conflict management, as well as a senior fellow at the Center of Transatlantic Relations at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is also a scholar at the Middle East Institute, and while working for the U.S. Institute of Peace, he led missions to the Balkans. He was a minister and counselor at the Department of State serving from 1994 to 96, as a special U.S. envoy and coordinator for the Bosnian Federation, mediating between the Turks, the Muslims, and the Muslims, and negotiating the first agreement that they reached at the Dayton peace talks. We then have with us Shirley DeGuardia. I should be able to pronounce your name all after all these years. DeGuardia. And she is a Balkan Affairs advisor to the Albanian American Civic League, a position she's held since 1995, together with her husband, who is a former member of Congress, I might add, a very well-respected member of Congress. She has worked to bring lasting peace and stability to the Balkans. Shirley is a former publisher of the Lawrence Hill books, specializing in domestic and international politics. And then in 1995, she published Yugoslavia's Ethnic Nightmare, first book on the causes and consequences of the Balkan conflict. She has worked closely with Albanian communities and holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Oberlin College and a master's in divinity from the Union Theological Seminary in New York. And after that, we have Mr., and I'll have to make sure I pronounce this right, is this Kessick? Mr. Kessick, a senior partner with TSM Global Consultants. Over the last 2 decades, Mr. Kessick served as consultant on Balkan affairs for various U.S. agencies, international corporations, and organizations. Mr. Kessick is a member of the board of directors of the Institute on Religion and Public Policy. He is a co-founder and represents the Serbian American community in the National Democratic Ethnic Coordinating Committee and is a consultant and advisor to the Serbian American Institute. We then have Mr. Joni, who since 2005 has been an advisor and a component leader for USAID projects in Kosovo. For that, he worked for the United Nations, but before that, excuse me, he worked for the United Nations in Kosovo. He was also an expert working on drafting the Kosovo Constitution in 2008. He is currently a PhD candidate in the School of Politics and International Relations of the University College Dublin and a Fulbright Scholar. He holds a Master's Law degree from Columbia Law School and a law degree from Faculty of Law at the University of Tirana in Albania. Then we have Bob Churcher, a freelance consultant specializing in political analysis and post-conflict issues with considerable experience in the Balkans. Following a successful career in the British Army, he went to work for the British Foreign Office and the European Community as an observer in the Bosnian War and stayed in the Balkans, most often in Albania and Kosovo, with various international organizations. This included serving as director for the International Crisis Group on Kosovo. With that, we may start with Mr. Stewart. As I say, if you try to keep it to 5 minutes, then we'll have time for a dialogue or questions and answers. But anything you would like to put into the record will be made part of the record at the time, along with your testimony. So, thank you very much. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity to testify on the pathway to peace for Kosovo and Serbia, which has been a long and difficult one. With your permission, I will summarize and submit my full testimony for the record. I'd like to make 5 points. First, this is a good agreement. If fully implemented, it will go a long way to establishing democratically validated institutions, as well as clear legal and police authority on the whole territory of Kosovo, while allowing ample self-governance for Serbs in northern Kosovo on many other issues. In fact, ample self-governance for Serbs throughout Kosovo. Second, implementation will be a challenge, one that requires Pristina to make integration attractive and Belgrade to end the financing that makes resistance in northern Kosovo possible. Belgrade and Pristina will need to cooperate to end the smuggling of tax-free goods that has enriched the organized crime and spoilers both Serb and Albanian. Third, the agreement should end any discussion of exchange of territory between Kosovo and Serbia, which in my view is a bad idea that risks destabilizing Bosnia, Macedonia, and even Serbia proper. We should work to make northern Kosovo a model of win-win reintegration for the rest of the Balkans. Fourth, Belgrade and Pristina have taken an important step towards normalizing relations, but they will need to do more, including eventual recognition and exchange of ambassadors. If that does not happen, neither will be able to get into the EU, and both may try to arm themselves for a possible new confrontation. In accordance with this agreement, I would note, each will apply for EU membership as a separate, independent, and sovereign state. Fifth, we owe props to the EU, and in particular Catherine Ashton, not only for the mediation work she did, but also for the vital incentives the EU provided. The U.S. government shares supporting active credit with leading Lady Ashton, which is as it should be. Mr. Chairman, I am relieved that an agreement has been reached, but still concerned about the future. The Belgrade-Pristina dialogue is a classic case of elite pact-making without a broader peace-building process. The underlying drivers of conflict have not been addressed. Many Serbs and Kosovo Albanians still think badly of each other and rank themselves as victims. I agree with you on that. There has been little mutual acknowledgement of harm. Few Albanians and Serbs have renewed personal ties, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to do so as many younger people lack a common language other than English. It's almost 14 years since the end of the NATO-Yugoslavia war. To be self-sustaining, this peace process is going to need to go deeper and involve many more citizens on both sides. The road is long, Mr. Chairman, but we are near its end, and we need to keep going in the right direction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your very optimistic testimony. Shirley, are you as optimistic as that gentleman?
I regret, can you hear me? I regret to say I'm not. Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. I will be submitting my testimony for the record and summarizing it here. I would also like to take this opportunity to append to my testimony a recent article in the Eurasia Review by Fatem Bislimi entitled "The Politics of Compromise is Compromising Kosovo's Future."
That will be, with no objections, that will be attached to your testimony.
Thank you. I want to note that it is primarily in this hearing room among all the governmental bodies in the West that the hard questions about the Balkan conflict have been asked over the past 2 decades. Under former Chairman Gilman, Hyde, Lantos, the serious effort was made to reveal and explore the realities on the ground in South Central Europe during Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic's brutal 10-year occupation of Kosovo and genocidal march across the Balkans that ultimately claimed 200,000 lives and left 4 million displaced. It was here that the vote was cast to support NATO airstrikes against Serbia, which finally brought the Kosovo war to an end in 1999 and ended the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, it cannot be more timely to have this particular hearing now in your subcommittee, raising questions about the resolution of the Balkan conflict just days after Catherine Ashton, the European Union's High Representative, has proclaimed a successful outcome to 10 rounds of talks between Belgrade and Pristina. If the outcome were genuinely successful, this hearing would not be necessary, but unfortunately, in my opinion, the agreement between Serbian Prime Minister Dacic and Prime Minister Thaci is a quick fix. It does not amount to a comprehensive and effective agreement that will bring lasting peace and stability to the region. In my opinion, this will only happen when Serbia recognizes Kosovo's sovereignty and its admission to international institutions, grants equal civil and human rights to the Albanian majority in the Preševa Valley, on a par, I might add, with the rights that are currently enjoyed by Serbs in Kosovo, relinquishes its parallel structures in northern Kosovo, and focuses on the economic and political development of Serbia. Once that happens, Kosovo's government will need to focus on the establishment of a genuine democracy and rule of law, something that it has failed to do because of its lack of sovereignty and the corruption of many of its government officials. The 15-point agreement on April 19 does not, in my opinion, as Catherine Ashton has declared, amount to a step closer to Europe for both Serbia and Kosovo. On the contrary, it will allow Serbia to interfere in the internal affairs of Kosovo. With this agreement, Serbia will be allowed to enter into the membership negotiations with the EU through a false demonstration of neighborly relations with Kosovo, and ultimately to achieve what has always been its primary goal: the denial of Kosovo's sovereignty and the acquisition of northern Kosovo. Now, how have we arrived at this point? It is the result, in my opinion, of three interconnected patterns in the post-war period that still continue 13 years after the war. One, delaying the resolution of Kosovo's final status, its declaration of independence notwithstanding, due to a misguided Western foreign policy approach that has appeasing Serbia as its centerpiece. Two, successive U.S. administrations taking a backseat to Europe when it comes to policy in the Balkans. And three, Belgrade's efforts to destabilize Kosovo with the goal of making the de facto partition of northern Kosovo a legal, de jure reality. We had a different chance at war's end. The Clinton administration and the EU could have recognized Kosovo's inevitable independence, informed Belgrade that it had forfeited its legitimacy to govern Kosovo, and set Serbia on a path to democratization. But as we know, this isn't what happened. Kosovo became a protectorate of the UN, and even today, because a large number of member states in the UN General Assembly have not recognized Kosovo's sovereignty, and especially because 5 member states in the EU, Spain, Cyprus, Greece, Romania, and Slovakia, still refuse to do so, Kosovo's political, economic, and social progress, like Bosnia, has been stymied. For the past 15 years, or 13 years, I should say, almost 14, we have witnessed a foreign policy in the U.S. State Department that, instead of being prevention-oriented and making human rights the centerpiece, instead has constructed policy frameworks to delay the resolution of Kosovo's final status and admission to the EU, NATO, UN, and other international institutions. I don't believe that it serves the United States to continue to distance itself from the resolution of the Balkan conflict by deeming it Europe's problem. Contrary to what our State Department has said today, whenever the United States has taken a backseat to Europe, and I still believe it has, the situation in the region has deteriorated because the EU's diverse 27 member states have not been able to coalesce around a common foreign policy apart from America's political and military leadership that has been true for over a decade. The Obama administration has been publicly holding the line that the de facto partition of northern Kosovo should not become legal, but they actually haven't taken any action to back up the position. For more than 2 decades, Belgrade has been able to move into that vacuum created by the lack of unity and lack of resolve among the EU member nations, between the EU and the US, and all the more so because the guiding principle of the EU and our government has been appeasement. Belgrade's goal has always been to achieve its expansionist aims in Kosovo diplomatically by legalizing the partition of northern Kosovo, just as it achieved its expansionist aims in Bosnia by force, when at the end of the Bosnian War in 1995, it was awarded with the artificially created Republic of Srpska. Ever since the war ended in June '99, there's been an effort to destabilize the North. Now, I'll conclude, in a final push to resolve the conflict between Belgrade and Pristina in order to achieve the principle of exiting the region, The EU, with the support of the U.S. government, has proclaimed an agreement that unfortunately papers over the roots of the conflict and the realities on the ground. The Balkans are again at risk because the current agreement does not grapple with the roots of the Balkan conflict and doesn't carve out a real solution. I think the time has come to ask all parties, the U.S. government, the EU, Serbia, what do they really want? Will Belgrade struggle to retain Kosovo at all costs? And will Serbia become part of Europe? The current accord enables Belgrade to enter into membership talks with the EU, but without dismantling the structures in northern Kosovo, without recognizing Kosovo's sovereignty, without acknowledging Kosovo's right to enter bodies. Will the U.S. and the EU decide what they really want? A whole divided, undivided, peaceful, democratic, and prosperous EU, or a periphery of failed, aid-dependent societies that saddle it with economic and law enforcement responsibilities? To prevent a costly and potentially deadly conflict going forward, the West will have to rethink its diplomatic strategy. We need a new paradigm for how we handle foreign policy in the Balkans and elsewhere. Again, one that emphasizes conflict prevention and human rights, not stability at all costs. Thank you.
I also want to say Guardia, it's not the Guardia, because it's the airport.
Thank you. Employees feel Guardia. Very common.
I've only known you guys for like 20
Common issue. No problem.
Let me add one phrase, and then we'll go on to questions afterwards from your presentation. And does Kosovo, how long delays this hanging on to an area that has, where the vast majority, 90% of the people, don't want to be part of Kosovo, in the same way they didn't want to be part of Serbia. Mr. Casey, you may proceed with your testimony. Use your question button right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask that my statements, complete statement, be entered into the record. And
it certainly will be. Thank you.
Thank you. One quick question for you. Can I depart from my prepared statement for 1 minute?
You may depart from your prepared statement for the whole testimony, and your testimony will be put into the record, but you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's all I'll need. I want to respond to something that you actually initiated in the discussion with Jonathan Moore, and that is the question about the issue of partition or allowing self-determination. And I'll come back to this from my full statement. But the one question that's really perplexed not only Serbs, but also some experts in this town, is why the U.S. government insists on taking every option off the table and claiming that partition is destructive when they partition Serbia. There seem to be no qualms about changing the borders of Serbia, but yet they all of a sudden have found religion, true religion, when it comes to changing any other borders. And I think your position is legitimate. That's not to say that I agree with it. But I believe it's a question that needs to be asked, and this is a timely hearing to pose questions like that, as well as the questions that Congressman Poe posed about the discrepancy between justice and how justice and the rule of law are interpreted when it comes to trying to push forward the independence of Kosovo. Now, having said that, let me go back and try to explain to you why Serbs are very skeptical about this agreement as a whole. Even those who have signed this agreement have expressed skepticism and have claimed that they signed it on the basis that if they didn't, they would be forced to accept the worst reality. So it wasn't out of free will, as they would portray it. It was coerced signature. And of course, that leaves questions of implementation, and there we agree in terms of the skepticism that we share about the pitfalls of continuing dialogue and trying to implement something that from the start is difficult to implement. Now, many Serbs view that the U.S. and the EU have shown a consistent pattern of lying about their commitment to protect Serbs in Kosovo. During the '99 NATO intervention, Serbs were told that NATO, following the withdrawal of Serbian police and army, would protect them. Since the entry of NATO into Kosovo in June 1999, over 250,000 non-Albanians were driven from their homes through violence, intimidation, and harassment. According to the OSCE Kosovo mission, in a report of October 2012, 235,000 non-Albanians remain displaced. Also, the U.S. constantly and the EU constantly move the goalposts. The Serbs were promised that status would be dealt with after standards were implemented. Then, once that proved to be impossible, they told the Serbs that it would be standards and status simultaneously. Then, when Kosovo proclaimed independence, they were told that standards would come after status. But we're still waiting to this day to deal with the standards. Serbs do not have confidence in the word of the U.S. and the EU. Secondly, many Serbs also question the selective application of international law by the U.S. and the EU. When the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was disintegrating in violence and conflict, the Bandit Committee ruled that territorial sovereignty and integrity of the republics prevailed over the rights of national groups to self-determination, thus holding that Slovenia, Croatia, and the four republics had the right to partition Yugoslavia, while at the same time being entitled to their own territorial integrity, regardless of the demands of the Krajina Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs, to self-determination. It should be noted that the Commission held that this also was the case with Serbia itself. Most Serbs wonder why it seems that everybody but Serbs have a right to self-determination. Third point is that Serbs are also upset with what seems to be constant moving of goalposts by the EU and the US when it comes to conditionality regarding Serbia's entry into the EU. I just want to move to my recommendations, and I'll end there. First recommendation is the US and the EU should firmly oppose any use of violence, especially directed or threatened against the Serbs in the north of Kosovo, no matter from whom that threat comes from. Secondly, the EU should engage the Serbian leaders in north of Kosovo and begin a series of discussions that would lead to their active involvement in all negotiations that concern their future. Third, the EU and the US should reconsider all potential options for the northern Serb communities, including enhanced autonomy, parallel shared sovereignty, the federalization, regionalization of Kosovo, and even allowing them the right to self-determination. Fourth, the EU should be encouraged to formally and publicly announce all of the remaining conditions being put before Serbia and Kosovo, that the U.S. should insist that this list be considered final and that no additional conditions be added without the consensus of all EU members. Fifth, the EU and the U.S. must demand that the Albanian-dominated Kosovo government increase its efforts to protect the rights of Serbs and other non-Albanians throughout the remaining territory under its control. Sixth, the U.S. Congress should organize additional hearings focusing attention and building support for action in improving human, minority, and civil rights of Serbs and other non-Albanians in Kosovo. And finally, the EU-sponsored talks between Belgrade and Pristina should be continued, but refocus on technical issues such as property rights, etc., so that there could be a gradual building of goodwill, so that then we can address this other issue of status. And once the issue of status is addressed, then the UN should be present, since it will take a Security Council resolution to resolve the issue of status and formalize it.
Thank you very much for your very poignant presentation. Mr. Joni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And dear members of the committee, I would like to say that I have made a full written statement, which I wish, with your permission, to be included as a part of the record, and I'll hereby summarize the main elements of it.
And with no objection, so ordered.
So my presentation today is mainly based on policy-making perspective. I come here after working with Pristina institutions and many extensive experience in Serb communities in Kosovo with the establishment of post-independence municipalities. So I'll explain the positions of the parties when this EU brokered agreement started, where did it end, and what does it mean for the future or the sustainable peace in the Balkans. First, I must say that in October 2012, EU High Representative Ashton managed to bring together for the first time after independence the two prime ministers, and the central issue revolved around the status of the northern predominantly Serb municipalities. Pristina started from the perspective that the Ahtisaari plan was sufficient to address all potential concerns of Serb community in Kosovo in terms of cultural preservation, living as Serbs within Kosovo. And Serbia started with a new political platform for discussions with Christian institutions, which provided extensive powers for a Serb community in the North Kosovo, extended as well in the southern enclave. After several rounds, with several walkouts from both representatives, delegations, we have now seen one rejection on 4th of April by the Prime Minister of Serbia, arguing that what has been offered by EU does not address the concerns of the Serb community in the north. And on 19th of April, we have a 15-point agreement. This is now important to see what the position of the parties came to be after the renewed talks. Now, Kosovo has gone beyond the adversary plan in accepting partially the Serbian request. For one, elevating the status of the Serb community to almost an autonomous monoethnic entity, allowing the four municipalities to coalesce and have the police commander for the region and 4 police stations, a separate panel of judges, and I hope it is not true, but it has been reported that under guarantees from NATO, it has been agreed that no Kosovo security intelligence or police forces will ever access or operate in the area. Now, this, as you may better know from McCulloch versus Maryland in the United States, is very consequential for the territorial integrity of Kosovo. Because even in federal state, the federal government can and should, in the limited areas where it is sovereign, intervene for different reasons in the region. In this particular case, it appears that no Kosovo institution can ever reach there, even if it's about scenarios of rebellious attitudes from the local population. So the second thing that I would like to point out is that it has been, during the adversary talks, the policy of international EU and US negotiated that a human rights-based approach and not a territorial-based approach is the solution to Kosovo's future. And we have looked carefully to Ohrid Agreement and Bosnia, and without any doubt, people thought back then that the best institutional mix for ensuring all communities in Kosovo was a human rights minority-based approach modeled around Ohrid. What we see now, we see a further territorialization of politics, which is a departure from the concept of a multi-ethnic society, which is the linchpin of Adisari incorporated in Kosovo Constitution. The second problem that I see in this agreement is that it's uneven. While we can see the move of Kosovo into approaching or accommodating the Serb community, it has not been the persistence of EU to ensure that at least Kosovo is not blocked in the membership in the UN system. Of course, there is some thrown away provision about not blocking each other on EU integration, but what does that mean when 5 nations don't recognize Kosovo anyway? So what can Serbia help there? I don't understand. And the third is, where do we go from now? I think if there is any good thing that this has shown, is that EU, regardless of economic downturn and crisis, has a significant appeal in the Western Balkans, and it may be the only thing that Albanians and Serbs agree on is the EU integration. Therefore, I think, first, there is no room for complacency here. Second, there should be a point where EU and US redirect the parties towards a comprehensive deal, which deals with missing persons, which deals with war reparations, which deals with border demarcation, and reciprocity in terms of how we treat minorities, no matter where they are settled. And this is why I think US has a significant role to effect this agreement, ensure that this is only a first step, very pragmatic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we'll be anxious to read your written testimony as well. So you're still waiting for this comprehensive agreement to be brought on by Europeans and the Americans after 12 years of waiting. Hope springs eternal. Mr. Churchill, you're next.
Mr. Chairman, firstly, may I thank you and members.
We're having trouble hearing you. You've got to be as close to the mic and it's got to be turned on.
Mr. Chairman, is that better? Sorry. Firstly, may I thank you and the members for the honour of being invited to testify here. May I then say that I'd like to submit my testimony for the record. I should start with an interjection to say that you've really very much taken the words out of my mouth. My views very much reflect yours. Despite the difficulties, I think that a better settlement would be self-determination in some way. I do appreciate the difficulties with it. Now let me summarise my views about this new EU Brexit agreement. In contrast to many, certainly outside of this room, I do not believe that it is a good or workable agreement. International commentators have already made the agreement out to be wonderful, but as people say, the devil is in the detail. In reality, without any recognition of Kosovo by Serbia, it leaves Pristina in limbo. There will be a road from Kosovo, and the agreement will enable the creation of a new Republic of Serbia in the north of Kosovo. Without recognition, there is no way forwards for Kosovo. Kosovo will remain dysfunctional in the absence of any real legal sovereign status, and Serbs will continue to want to claim it or claim it back. Unfortunately, to be frank, this agreement has been much more about making the new EU Foreign Service, and in particular its leader, Catherine Ashton, look good, rather than producing any long-term sustainable solution to the Balkans. In my view, this was any agreement at any cost, whatever it took to agree it. Without including the recognition of Kosovo by Serbia, the agreement simply ratifies what already exists, a Serb-run statehood in the north of Kosovo. All that will be changed is that it will now be a legal Serb-run statehood within the north of Kosovo. Serbia's failure to recognize the loss of Kosovo is a failure to recognize the defeat of the Serbian project to drive the Kosovars out of Kosovo in the 1990s. I regard it as admirable that the United States intervened decisively in the Bosnian-Kosovo wars, but find it puzzling and disappointing that the resulting peace agreements have been designed to appease Serbia rather than create stability and lasting solutions in the Balkans. A much better solution than the present agreement might have been an agreement of territorial exchange, swapping the new, now Serb-populated north with the still Albanian-speaking Preševo and balance. In contrast to the State Department's speaker's view, I can assure you that the local people in Preševo do not share the feeling that Serbia is looking after their human rights. Unfortunately, this idea is probably not yet practical in international terms, but there has to be a way forwards. The situation ratified by the new agreement will be disastrous in enabling the establishment of the Second Republic of Serbia. The only answer, in my view, is that the United States should use its international influence to press for Serbia to recognize Kosovo, and thus finally end the conflict and enable the Kosovo government to move forwards from what will be otherwise an endless uncertainty. Without recognition, I believe we're doomed to perpetuating instability in the Balkans, which is not in the United States' interests or that of anyone else. And let me conclude by pointing out that it's absolutely no use to rely on Europe, unfortunately, to sort this out. Europe remains completely disunited and dysfunctional in its dealings with Kosovo, as it was and is in Bosnia. As in 1999, only the United States has sufficient weight and influence to bring the Serbs to recognise reality that Kosovo is lost, and that in order for both countries to move forwards, they need to recognise it. Thank you, sir.
Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses, and I certainly appreciate your last comments there, of course. Let me just note, and then we'll have a dialogue back and forth. This religious conviction that you cannot change borders or create all sorts of problems is, I think, the major obstacle to having a significant peace agreement between these two entities, between the Kosovars and the Serbs. And it's our own government that's pushing this nonsense. It's nonsense. I mean, the Czechs and the Slovaks knew that they couldn't get along, so they divided. And they changed the border. The border now became Czechs and Slovaks in two separate countries. You had the North and South Sudan. Does everyone still, they believe that we should forcibly keep the North and South Sudan together? What would that bring? It would bring a lot of bloodshed. That's what it would bring. What about Ireland? Wouldn't it be how horrible to think that we're going to change the borders of Great Britain itself? You know, by letting these. So what if the Irish want to have independence? The vast majority, they're still part of the British Empire, and here it is. We can't change the border of the British Empire to just include the areas in the northern part of Ireland that happen to be a majority of Protestant. That was a good decision. That was a good decision. Let's end the conflict and agree that those people in the northern part of Ireland have a right to make their decision with a ballot box. But we're being told here, no, can't do that. And then, of course, we do have to, as Mr. Kasich said, if we accept the fact that the United States and the Allies had any moral foundation to coming in to help Kosovo, and I want you to know, of course, I was a huge supporter of Kosovo and coming in to help them win their freedom and independence, because of our belief in their right to make that determination, the national self-determination. Well, if the people in the north don't have, how come Kosovo had that right to break away from Serbia? That changed borders. And I believe Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, I seem to remember the Soviet Union as it was breaking up saying, no, this is part of Russia. It doesn't make any difference what those people want. They're part of Russia. And there are, of course, do we think that it was really, we should have encouraged the people of Bangladesh to knuckle under and stay part of Pakistan, because that's going to change the borders of Pakistan. And by the way, Pakistan, what borders do they have? Who created Pakistan? Pakistan and most of these things we're talking about were created by the colonial imperialists of 150 years ago or 200 years ago. And we're saying we have to stick with the decision of some drunken royalty in one of these countries who decided this is where the borders are going to be now? Ridiculous. And what we've done by this fantasy that you can't, that's off the table, we have left us in a situation where our friends, the Kosovars, have now, looks like from this agreement, they have now been put into a position of getting nothing. Because this word, you can call autonomy authority all you want. But what we have here is an official recognition of the autonomy of those four northern provinces. And our friends in Kosovo, who I happen to be on their side, have got nothing to show for it. At least if we could have an honest agreement on the right of self-determination, which is what the people of Kosovo believe in, that's why they declared their independence, at least we could have some sort of a readjustment of a border that includes people who want to be in the country that now has emerged because of the changes that have taken place historically. So I'm very disturbed by this settlement. This settlement will not lead to peace. This settlement will encourage those Serbs in the northern part of these four provinces to work with Belgrade and Belgrade to work with them in order to keep this sort of combative relationship going, and it will not create less, it will create more tensions. And that's just my personal observations, and it seems to me that the Peshawar Valley and the fact that you have so many Kosovars living there, almost the same size as the four northern provinces, almost same territory, almost same population. It is a natural way for Kosovo and Serbia to do something real, not just play with words about autonomy versus authority, but something real that could then serve as the basis for them starting to get along and try to open up their borders, try to have free trade between them, try to have respect for each other's citizens, because we aren't forcing people into a recognition of something that they don't want and they don't culturally feel right and historically feel right about it. So I mean, all of these countries, what I just mentioned, especially the Irish, can you imagine if Britain would have said that and wanted to keep the Irish in? That would have been a disaster for Great Britain, as well as I might add for Pakistan and Bangladesh and the rest of the ones. If any of you have a comment on what I just said, please feel free. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, with due respect.
Absolutely. Don't you feel free to disagree with everything that I said?
I do disagree.
Okay, yes, sir.
And I disagree because I think you're failing to make some important distinctions between moving the border to accommodate ethnic differences and changing the status of an existing boundary or border, which is what we've done in the record.
And moving the border and changing the border are two different things.
Moving the border and changing its status are two completely different things. Moving the border to accommodate ethnic differences leads to an infinity of movement of borders. It can never be.
But isn't that what we did in Kosovo? Isn't that what all these countries
like
like
this? Kosovo, we kept the boundary between the province of Kosovo, the one-time Serbian province of Kosovo, and Serbia proper. We kept that exactly where it is. That's why we have the problem that we have.
By the way, who drew those borders?
Those borders were drawn under Tito. They were changed various.
Tito, was he a democratically elected guy?
No, but look.
How about Stalin changing the borders of Obsenia and Abkhazia for Georgia?
If you set off an infinite series of border changes, you also precipitate ethnic cleansing. And that would be a disaster for the Balkans. I can guarantee that if the north of Kosovo is lost to Kosovo, you will have radical Albanians who will seek to expel Serbs from south of the Ibar and who will seek union with Albania and with Macedonia. You would say, let them. I say that's a scenario for an extreme outburst of violence.
Actually, I would never say let them. I believe that keeping large hunks of people who are contiguous to another border, can't be in the middle of a country, obviously, but keeping them artificially in that other country is what creates violence, which creates people wanting to conduct some sort of attack on those people and their retaliation against those. It's happened over and over again. And what doesn't create, I mean, this idea that we're going to instill in the rule of law and that's what's going to make the Irish give up their notion that they want to be independent, or the Bangladeshis, or the people north of the Serbs north of that river, going to give up their consciousness as being Serbs. It doesn't work that way.
Nobody's asking them to give up the consciousness as being Serbs. In fact, there are all sorts of provisions in the Ahtisaari plan for maintaining the links to Serbia. They get dual citizenship. It's just to open Pandora's box and allow an infinite series of border changes to accommodate ethnic differences. There are Bosniaks in Serbia that want to be part of
So you believe that the boundaries set up by brutal tyrants and kings, and royalty have to be maintained because it's going to open Pandora's box, even though there are significant groups of people who have a cultural and historical identification with each other who want to become a nation. But if it violates what King Charles or some monarch someplace did back
I
2 years
believe
ago.
that everybody's rights should be protected within the borders in which they happen to find themselves. Yes, because anything else
So you oppose the Kosovars?
leads to death and destruction.
Okay, but you then opposed Kosovars. When they rose up and said, no, we want to be independent, you were opposed to that, right? Because that would change the borders
I
of
was
Serbia.
not the first one to endorse independence for Kosovo, I'll say that. But the behavior of Serbia in response to that uprising unquestionably made independence the only solution, and it was achieved not by moving the border to accommodate ethnic difference, but by changing the status of the pre-existing border. And I believe that that decision saved lives. Yes.
Let me suggest to you that, and then I'll go to the panel, suggest to you that had the Yugoslavia just broke up, had the West been very clear that different people have the right to vote on their self-determination, and included the Kosovars in that, that would have been a whole, the bloodshed that happened wouldn't have happened. Instead, we have Jim Baker down there misstating our case to Milosevic, and letting them think that, well, whatever force he needs to use to keep things together, we're looking for you to be the force down here of stability. And of course, that just was a go get him type of thing. Shirley, and then Mr. Kasich, and then Mr. Engel will have a chance, or whoever else wants to jump in. Yes.
To my colleague, I want to ask a question, ask many. Why are we always talking about potential Albanian violence in Macedonia, in the north? Why is that happening? I think one of our problems is the constant discussion of a kind of false parody and characterization of a war that was supposedly based on ethnic and religious differences. This was not the case. This was a land grab. And we sat back, as you know, our State Department, the EU, and Milosevic made his genocidal march across Europe over 10 years. What I would like to see right now is for this agreement to be ground to a halt, because I understand very much what you're trying to say about the issue of Preševa and the North. But the problem is, we're in trouble now. Preševa, the Albanian majority of Preševa and Medvedjev were never brought to the discussion to begin with. And Mr. Churchill was very correct in saying the State Department was wrong when he said that, Mr. Moore said that there were, the Albanians in the Preševa Valley had, civil rights and human rights protections. That's absolutely not the case. They have second, if not third class citizenship. So, how do we do something now to turn this around so that everyone is forced to look at the true conditions of what is happening in the Albanian scene?
What we could do is we can make believe that the word authority and autonomy we just have different meanings, and we could pretend what those words mean.
Well, we already have.
I know, that's what I'm saying here.
Association of Serbian municipalities is in effect an autonomous region already.
Especially
to a great extent, we have lost the North.
Especially when you suggest that the forces of the country can't go into the area, and that's not an autonomy. Mr. Kasich, do you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's for me the most frustrating thing is this relative moralism that comes out in the official position of the U.S. government, but also in terms of some analysts here in Washington, D.C., and also in Europe. You have this argument, for example, that you can change the borders of Yugoslavia. And by the way, the U.S. government was against that at that time, as you know, Mr. Chairman.
That's right.
We opposed it, but it happened. Imperial powers have come to the Balkans throughout history, believing that they were setting borders that were going to last for all ages. every single time the borders change. We are just the latest of the great powers who have come into the region, and our hubris tells us that what we're going to do is going to last for all time. History will prove us wrong, unfortunately. I just hope it's not through more bloodshed. Now, to go back and to say, as was said here, for example, that Serbia had somehow lost its right to Kosovo because of the use of violence, then I would lay before the question, what is that magic point where a country loses the right to part of its country because of ethnic persecution and violation? Is it 60,000 Kurds in Turkey that are killed? Is it 230,000 Serbs and non-Albanians driven out of Kosovo? What is that magic point where people become entitled to self-determination? It would be very useful as a guideline for all of these oppressed peoples throughout the world to understand what is the position of the U.S. government on this.
I appreciate that comment, and I just, if you do believe in self-determination by a vote of the people, you don't have to worry about that, do you? Because you've got that one standard, and yes, we'll go right on down, and then we'll let Mr. Engel have his chance to question. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll come back to a point that you, in passing, mentioned about relying more on internationals even after 13 years. And I would respectfully disagree with you. What I'm saying in my presentation, and it's clear in the full written statement, is that I don't believe in hypocrisy. If in 2008, Russia, EU, and US did a lot of arm twisting to say to Kosovo that the way forward is a melting pot, now you either stick to it, or you say, let's go to border changes, open all the cards, let's talk about Albanian nationalism, effects in Bosnia and Croatia, but openly so. Just put the cards on the table. So my perspective is that I think that the idea of EU is to Europeanize the Balkans, not to further Balkanize the North, and wait for the moment when Serbia or Kosovo
to be taken into consideration. It's that their views, and again, we've got Serbians who are north of that river who do not want to be part of this country, and there is a natural border, and it's the same number of Kosovars, just in a valley not too far from there, in about the same area, but nobody wants to talk about having adjusting a border because of this. And I have to say, from my point of view, and I know you are very educated people who can disagree honestly on it, but this absolute hysterical idea that borders can't change. It's people who, we as the United States started with what? We the people of the United States. I mean, we are here because we are declaring our independence. We declared our independence from Great Britain. That's what the Declaration of Independence was, that the people have a right to, by majority, to determine their future. And last question, then this way. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Or comment. Go ahead.
To reinforce your remarks about borders.
Well, then you can have twice as much time.
And to comment on Mr. point, he referred all the time to opening the possibility of an infinity of changes, and he skated over slightly the fact that there had in fact been an infinity of changes in this particular area. In 1912, in the 1920s and 30s, again in the 50s, at times in Yugoslavia, different ministries used different borders in this area. There's nothing fixed or immutable about these borders. And as you said before, my view remains that if people wish to change them voluntarily, that is entirely different from imposed border changes. The key is, if people want to vote to be somewhere else, then they should be able to. And just very quickly to answer 2 points which came up earlier. The question of the Yellow House was remarked to be by rumour in Kosovo. It's not. It was rumoured to be in Burrell, which is in Albania. Just as a point, my own view is that those stories are fantasy, but you wouldn't want to catch a cold in Burrell, yet alone and the transport. And finally, to answer your question about the KSF in the north, my understanding is that there's a further sort of sidebar within this agreement that in fact the present Serbian Civil Defence Force in the north will in some way attempt to be incorporated within the Kosovo security forces as a Serb part in the north, again a separate thing, under the same sort of arrangements that have been made for the police and justice sectors. Thanks, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It would seem to me that Mr. Ingles can, or Mr. Key,
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Can you give your permission to Mr. Mayor?
Okay, now let me just one point, and that is, seems to me, if we have had armed forces there, and I visited our troops there many times, if we have armed forces there, and not just from our country, but from all these countries, it would be better to have them there to strongly and emphatically enforce a pre-election, run the election for people to determine how they want to run, what sovereignty they're willing to give, rather than have a force there for 13 years just to deter any type of ethnic violence that might happen, and hope that another 20 years from now, they'll forget the historic differences between them. Mr. Engel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And you and I have had many discussions on this through the years. And while we may disagree on this point, you have certainly, and I said it in my opening statement, been a champion for freedom in the region. And when I was among the first, if not the first person, member of Congress to endorse the independence of Kosovo, and we looked for people who would take principled position on this issue. You were right there all the time as well. So I want to say that publicly because I've lived with this issue for many years, and you were always right there fighting for peace and justice. I essentially disagree with moving the borders. If you could somehow just do it with Kosova and Serbia and kind of move the borders, and it would have no ramifications on any other place in the Balkans, I would say, well, okay, if both sides agree, let's just do it and do it quickly and the end. But I do agree with Mr. Soda that this would just, in the Balkans anyway, what would you do with Western Macedonia, which is vast majority Albanian? What would you do in Bosnia when Republic Srpska wants to join Serbia? And you would just keep going, and almost would be no end. But I do know how sincere you are and how thoughtful you've been with all these issues. I really wanted to talk about the agreement because I was told that most of you, if not all of you, didn't like this agreement between the Kosovars and the Serbs. I like the agreement. I like it not because I think every part of it is just. I like it because I think it offers the potential of hope and peace to the Balkans. I would hope that ultimately both Kosovo and Serbia would be members of the EU. And I think when people are all in the EU, borders are not going to be that important because people will have access to all places. I mean, I was, I think, the first member of Congress to advocate for an independent and free Kosovo. But I also said at the time that Serbs had a lot of interest there that needed to be respected, for instance, monasteries and things like that. I think it is possible to do that. You know, I have met with Slobodan Petrovic. He is the deputy prime minister in Kosovo. I've met with him in Kosovo, I've met with him in Washington, I met with him in New York. He plays a very important role. I know perhaps many Serbs don't like it, but I've watched him and I've seen him be very constructive. He's a Serb, and he is part of the majority in the Kosovo parliament and the deputy prime minister. I met him in the municipality of Gračanica. That's a Serb municipality in Kosovo. I sat and met with him and a bunch of other Serbs who are participating in the system, in the election. We had lunch, we sat for hours and hours and had very, very frank talks. I would remind everybody here that most of the Serbs, the majority of the Serbs living in Kosovo are in southern Kosovo, not in northern Kosovo. When Serbs south of the Ibar first voted in Kosovo, they said they would only vote in local elections, but then they voted in Kosovo's national elections. So these things can work if people really put their minds to it. In negotiations, you don't get everything you want. I mean, that's the point of negotiations. You get what you need to get, and the other side gets what they need to get, and if you have an agreement, you move on from there. I think that Prime Minister Thaci had pressure on him, and I think he passed the test and was very courageous in moving forward with this agreement. And I think the same for Prime Minister Dacic, also had pressure. Sometimes I think you've got to look beyond the rhetoric, you've got to look beyond the passion. In the Balkans especially, there are all kinds of grievances, slights that have been going on for centuries. I would hope that this agreement would be a small step in moving the Balkans into the 21st century. And again, I hope that Kosovo and Serbia become part of the EU, and that borders would not be that important anymore. So I just wanted to say that. I think it's easy to take a position in opposition to agreements where not everybody gets everything that they want. But I think it's a courageous step forward, and I think it'll be good for the region. And I have, in my now 25 years in Congress, I have not worked harder on any issue than I've worked on this issue. I know it backwards and forwards. I respect everybody's opinion. Up here, you're all good witnesses and intelligent people and have your vantage points. But I think that when you boil it all down, this agreement has some promise for the future. And I hope it'll be implemented, and I hope we'll take little steps that will be moving forward. And I think the role of the United States in this is very, very important because we are trusted in the region. I certainly know the Albanian community in the Balkans better than I know any community in the Balkans. And I know that the Albanians like and trust the United States and are very pro-West. You know, the day that Kosovo issued its independence, there were more American flags in the streets of Pristina than there were Albanian or any other kind of flag. So there is a very strong tie in the Albanian communities of Kosovo and Albania, frankly, of trust in the United States, of the belief in the United States, and wanting to work for the United States. So I hope the administration will be there every step of the way, and it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean that there still aren't perceived slights and threats and everything on both sides, but I hope it means we're moving forward, and I hope the United States is there every step of the way, because I don't believe that there can be as much progress without the United States right there as there is with the United States right there. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me express these sentiments.
Might I suggest to my colleague that if they have some comments, you might want to have a little dialogue with Pat.
Sure.
Whoever, go. But you're in charge of pointing out who you want.
Congressman Engel, yes. Congressman Engel, thank you. I very much agree with your long-term perspective. I think there's no one at this panel who would not want, obviously, just and lasting peace and stability in the region. And certainly, ultimately, the integration of the EU. But I think we have to look at the specifics of this issue. For example, you said something I think is very important. The majority of Kosovo Serbs live in the central and southern part. 2/3 do. 66% of the Kosovo Serbs voted in the last election. Those Serbs are well integrated into Kosovo. Why is it that the north is a different story? And I am concerned that we tend to forget about how the North became to be. I mean, after the war ended, the French took over the area. It became the part of Kosovo that Albanians were thrust out of. Yes, there are majority Serbs in the north, but what has transpired since the war is Belgrade extremists, Serb extremists in the north, backed by Belgrade. We've had lawlessness, corruption, smuggling, a complete breakdown. So when we go now, and by the way, we should add one other thing. When independence was declared, what happened? Our own NATO troops even stood on the sidelines while Serb extremists blew up, customs, courthouses, destroyed many things in reaction. So now, when we look at the current agreement that has come forward, I think we have to be realistic. Does it solve the root causes of the crisis? Does it change the conditions in the north? And the devil is always in the details, and when you look at the ability of what will be, and Chairman Rohrbacher talked about it, a police force and an executive that very much has a lot of autonomy, we'll now see, I think, a different relationship, and this is sad, between the northern municipalities where four mayors will basically decide, who the Kosovo chief of police will be. There will become a different relationship, potentially, between the north and the Serb communities in the central and south areas of Kosovo, because there isn't any kind of real willingness on the part of the Belgrade government for Kosovo to succeed in the future in what you're talking about, long-term development and integration into Europe. So this is why I said before you came back into the room to Chairman Rohrbacher, I would like to see this whole agreement ground to a halt. I know that may be the ultimate, illusion, but if we had more U.S. interaction and less of a backseat on the part of the administration and the ability to reconnect, at least in a very full engagement during this process where we're supposedly now going up till April 26th, look how soon that is, to talk about the implementation. We need to, and that's when we bring Khrushchev back on the table.
Well, I would say this. The incentive for the Serbs to try to make this happen is that they know that they cannot become an EU member unless they normalize to an extent the relations with Kosovo. That's the incentive. And likewise, the Kosovo Albanians understand that if they want to be integrated into Europe, they've got to have some kind of agreement with the Serbs. So I think that that's the glue that binds them. And we have to, again, America, the United States, be there every step of the way. Many things similar to what you just said, Shirley, and I respect the work you've done through the years. Was said about the Serbs in the South, that they would never participate, that they would never accept it, until people started participating. And then they saw benefits in their lives of being part of the Kosovo state. I believe a similar thing can happen in the North. I think we have to try. And I think that, again, while there's no magic wand, and obviously people are born and raised in their families talking about previous wars 100, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, and whatever, that's ingrained in people. But I think we need to understand that once Belgrade feels that they may not like everything in the agreement, but if it gets them into the EU, that's the price they have to pay. And conversely, the same thing with the Kosovo Albanians. So I think that that's the glue that holds them together, the incentive to get into the European Union. And that's why I think this is a good agreement. I don't think it's a great agreement for either side, but I think it's a good agreement for either side. And I think, again, Daci and Dacic deserve a lot of credit for their courage.
just a few quick comments and ideas for you to think about. First, I agree with you. It would be wonderful when the time comes when borders are unimportant. But the Serbs in the north have a hard time understanding if borders are to become unimportant. Why are the borders of Kosovo so important to be established? If the goal is to make borders irrelevant, why force the Serbs in the north to accept borders and have to impose it on them? Which leads me to my second statement, which is that the only way this agreement can be forced on the Serbs in the north is through the use of force. And I don't think any one of us in this room would like to see the use of force against anybody in the region. There's been already too much use of force. So if we say that this is not an enforceable agreement, doesn't mean that we don't support the process of negotiations and the general idea that agreements need to be reached between conflicting parties. It's just a skepticism that this particular agreement, for all the reasons that were laid out from different perspectives, are going to create more problems on the ground and lead us to this decision of whether or not to use force. And I hope that this committee, as well as the U.S. Congress, comes firmly down against the use of any force against anybody in the region, in any future scenario. And finally, the EU process, I wish, could be sped up, but we have to be realistic. What the remaining countries of the Western Balkans are looking are first the very uncertain end of the line. Nobody knows, first and foremost, what's going to happen with this region. Secondly, nobody knows how long the process will take. We heard the representative of the administration say it took Croatia 10 years so that we can then start the clock rolling perhaps for Serbia for the next 10 years. But we're not sure. My own opinion is that realistically, in the best case scenario, it will take 15 to 20 years. And in the meantime, we have a security vacuum that needs to be filled. And I think we need to have everything on the table to consider, including the ideas of the chairman, in order to better approach dealing with these issues in a durable way, in the long term. Thank you.
Well, let me say this. I have long felt that Belgrade was lacking in leadership of people with vision who would take their people into the future. It's very easy to be as radical as you want to be. We do it here in this country. It's human nature. You throw red meat at the crowd. Republicans do it, Democrats do it, and you can all do that. But I think if you are really trying to foster a change, that it takes concessions and at least an attempt to understand what the other side is thinking and needs. So we can all pick apart this agreement all we want. There are things, anyone can pick apart. I could pick it apart. But I instead would like to accentuate the positives. I think there are a lot of positives in this agreement that we can hopefully see the people of the Balkans building on for the future so that they could live side by side and have a better future for their people. I remember the Northern Ireland situation, and I thought that was a situation that would never be solved. And look at it, it was solved because people decided that it was time to put aside these fights forever and look towards a better future for their children. I hope that's done here in the Balkans. I hope it's done in the Middle East regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it was done in Ireland. I think that there are always things that we think should be changed a little bit. But like in negotiations, you don't get everything that you want. And the incentive, I think, for the people of Kosovo is that they deserve their independence and that they can be a country, our country, that will be recognized as an independent country. It's the one thing. When I used to go around and talk about independence for Kosovo, and again, I was the first congressman to say I supported independence and have worked very hard for it, I used to say, and this is where Mr. Rohrbacher, because he and I have discussed this many times, feels strongly about self-determination and the right to exist. I used to say, it's one thing to say that the former Yugoslavia should not have broken up, and that everybody should should stay together. But once it did break up, and once you had Croatia and all these different countries deciding that Macedonia, etc., would be independent, I felt very strongly that the people of Kosovo had that same right to self-determination. I hope again that with the EU, borders will not be that important. And you're right, Mr. Kesic, it might take 10 or 15 years. I hope not. I hope not. Can I guarantee that it won't? I can't. But I think if people want to put the past, the bad elements of the past behind them, I think that extreme nationalism is just a path to destruction. And maybe trying to forge an agreement with the general push of the United States, maybe that's a better path to a better future for all the people in the Balkans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Engels, for all you've done. And his whole career has been trying to be a positive force in that part of the world. I guess I've been out trying to stir things up, and he's been trying to make things better. But we both are trying to make things better.
You've been trying to make things better, and I applaud you for it.
All right. And we have time for just a few more questions from Mr. Keating, and then we're going to have to close up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's one thing I think people here can get a sense of. We have the ranking member and the full committee, and we have the chairman here, and their interest and concern for the Balkans is intense, and it's real, and that's a good thing, that there's that much feeling for our country and the representatives get involved. I'm newer to the scene. I have a different approach. I really was going to use the same analogy that Mr. Engel used with Northern Ireland and Ireland in terms of the emotions and the feelings that they, by most, could never succeed. It's interesting, even though it's centuries difference. Some of those same arguments I've heard, you could say about our own country when we were starting, our own country, that there's not a strong enough authority, there's not a strong enough administration to pull things together. We're not in a position yet to do those things. And we had some tough times, and we had a civil war along the way, but we've succeeded in that process here in the United States as well. So my view, that I just want to address the one question on, is just the belief that this cannot be done just with two countries, that it's really a regional issue, has regional impact. And I believe personally that progress and stability and prosperity will come through economic means. I think we've seen it so many times. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it throughout the globe. And so with the region as a whole, as the context of what we do, I guess I just ask one question, given the time. Mr. Sewer, I'd just like to say, what do you think the April 19th agreement would have on the region, on other areas? If this is to progress and we make progress, what would it do with, Kosovo Valley area in Serbia, Macedonia, Bosnia? What could it be? Because I think as hard as the road is ahead with this agreement, there can be great regional progress. It can be a great example to go forward for other areas too. Could you address that, please?
Well, I agree entirely, Mr. Keating, and it's suggested in my testimony that that Northern Kosovo could be a model of reintegration. I must say, in the initial stages, though, I think there may be some protests in southern Serbia among Albanians asking for some of the same things that people in the north are getting in this agreement. But ultimately, I think the point is this, that if partition were to take place, you would have real trouble in Macedonia and real trouble in Bosnia and southern Serbia. With this agreement, as imperfect as it may be from the point of view of some of my colleagues, I think you have the potential, if fully implemented, for a decent sort of reintegration that could really help with the rest of the Balkans. And it's very much my hope that the authorities in Pristina and Belgrade will take the implementation seriously. And I see no reason why it's unworkable, frankly. It leaves a large amount of room for self-governance, but it incorporates the North into the legal constitutional structures of Kosovo. And if they're sincere about initiating this agreement, and I think the EU will ensure that they remain sincere by not giving out any goodies until they continue with implementation, I think it's workable, and I think it could be a real step forward for the region.
Well, I'll give that my time, Mr. Chairman. The hour's late.
I'd like to thank our panelists, and thank you, each and every one of you added each a lot of different spice to our meal of ideas. And I want to thank Elliot and our ranking member for adding to this hearing. I think we've had a good, very good discussion and aired a lot of ideas and concepts. And I appreciate each and every one of you. The one thing I left out on my list. I left out on the list that Montenegro was permitted to have a vote by the Serbs. Montenegro. And Serbia just said, no, Montenegro, that's part of our country. And it's like a state. It's not really like a separate country. And by doing that, they let those people have their freedom. And I'm just sorry that didn't happen in Kosovo a long time ago. But I think the Serbs demonstrated with Montenegro that this type of thing can work. And I would hope eventually all of these people understand that these borders are artificial and they should have free trade, work together. And once you get something like that going where all those countries, people will be crossing the borders and making money and building things and positive things such as that. That's a vision we all have. As the Balkans at peace, not the Balkans are people at war with one another. So thank you all very much, and this hearing is adjourned.